I hosted my in-laws for a weekend, trying so hard to make things right. I cleaned, cooked, even set out fresh towels. My mother-in-law looked around and said, "It's sweet how hard you try, but some people are born outsiders." I tried to laugh it off until I opened the guest book later that night. She'd written, "Thanks for letting us visit his house. You've done okay for a temporary occupant. 3 years ago, I married Nick. We live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a little 2-story house with a screened porch, creaky stairs, and a backyard where I've spent every spring planting flowers and pulling weeds. It's not fancy, but it's ours. Or so I thought. From day one, his family never liked me. His mom, Margaret, made that clear in every way that didn't sound rude on paper, but hurt just the same. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down and said, 'You must be resourceful, growing up where you did.' I grew up in a trailer outside Gastonia. My dad drove trucks. My mom cleaned houses. I worked hard to leave that life behind. I got a degree, a steady job at the hospital, and I didn't ask for handouts. I built a life. But to Margaret, none of that mattered. All she saw was someone not like her. She'd invite Nick to family events and tell me afterward, 'Oh, I assumed you'd be working. You always seem so busy.' She once told me, 'Don't take this the wrong way, but when I think of who Nick could have ended up with, you're not what I pictured.' Still, I tried. Every time, Nick would shrug and say, 'That's just how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it.' It got to the point where I started to think maybe I was just being sensitive. I blamed myself. Maybe I was looking for problems that weren't there. I started doing everything I could to win her over. Sending holiday cards, remembering her birthday, complimenting her taste even when she wore those weird silk scarves like she was on her way to a yacht club brunch. She never came to our house, though. Not once. Not until last month. Nick told me they wanted to come up for the weekend. Just to visit. "She's trying," he said. I didn't believe it, but I told myself maybe it was a step. So I went all out. I scrubbed everything. Baseboards, ceiling fans, even polished the damn silverware like we were expecting royalty. I bought the organic groceries she prefers. I ironed the guest bedsheets. I put fresh towels in the bathroom with a little lavender sachet tied in a ribbon. I even baked that stupid lemon cake she's obsessed with, the one that takes 4 sticks of butter and my soul. When they arrived, I stepped onto the porch to greet them with a smile so forced it almost cracked my face. Margaret walked in like she was inspecting a rental. She looked around the living room, ran her hand across the mantel, and said, "Well, it's sweet how hard you try. Some people are just born outsiders, I suppose." Just like that. Like she was commenting on the weather. Nick didn't say anything. He had his back turned, still grabbing luggage from the trunk. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to shake him and say, "Did you hear that? Did you finally hear it?" But I didn't. I just swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, too wired to sleep. I walked into the guest room to straighten up a bit, like a fool. That's when I saw it. I keep a guest book in the room. My sister gave it to me when we bought the house. "For memories," she said. Visitors could write little notes. "Had a great weekend." Or, "Thanks for the warm welcome." Margaret had written in it. She used a gold gel pen, probably the same one she uses for her Christmas cards. Her note read, "Thanks for letting us visit his house. You've done okay for a temporary occupant." I just stood there, staring at it. I read it 5 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. His house. Temporary occupant. I put the guest book back. I walked out slowly, like I was sleepwalking. I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes, holding onto the sink like it was the only solid thing in the world. And that's when something in me snapped. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was clear. I knew I would never be enough for her. I knew Nick would never defend me. And I knew it was time to stop playing nice. This was my home. And if Margaret wanted to treat me like some unwanted squatter, then it was time to show her what a permanent resident could really do. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Nick, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it creak as it turned. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her words again. Temporary occupant. The insult crawled under my skin like fire ants. By morning, something had shifted in me. I got up early. I made coffee. I made waffles. I even laid out a fresh dish of sliced fruit like I hadn't been humiliated the night before. When Margaret came downstairs, she barely nodded at me. She sat down at the table and said, "Well, this is quaint." I smiled. "I do what I can." Nick kissed her on the cheek and sat beside her. "Smells great, babe." Margaret gave a little laugh. "It's adorable how domestic you've become. Reminds me of those home economics classes they used to make us take." That was the last thing I let her say, without consequence. I started small. During the day, I accidentally gave her decaf when she clearly said she wanted regular. When she complained about a scratchy towel, I apologized sweetly and gave her one that smelled a little too strongly of vinegar. I forgot her dietary restrictions and added real sugar to her tea. Not poison, not dangerous, just enough to make her wonder if I was as clueless as she thought, or if I was finally waking up. Nick noticed none of it. Of course not. He was too busy watching basketball with his dad. The second night, I excused myself from dinner early. I said I had a headache. Truth was, I needed to look through Nick's phone. I knew his passcode. He never changed it. I wasn't looking for cheating. I didn't think Nick was that kind of man. I was looking for something worse. I found a message thread with his mom. A few weeks before the visit, she had texted, "Are you sure you want us to come all the way up there? It still doesn't feel like your house." Nick had replied, "I know, but it's better than arguing. She's trying hard. Let's just get through it." She had responded, "You're too patient." But yes. Let's play nice. Play nice. They were playing me. The rest of the messages made me sick. She called me the little climber. Said she was watching to see how long it lasts. Nick never corrected her. Not once. That night, after everyone went to bed, I didn't cry. I went downstairs. I took out the guest book and carefully tore out the page with her message. I didn't rip it. I used a razor blade to slide it cleanly from the binding. Then I put it in a plastic bag and sealed it. Evidence. I had a new plan now. The next morning, I packed a weekend bag. I told Nick I was going to my sister's for the night, which wasn't entirely true. I went to a hotel across town. Not because I needed space, but because I needed quiet. I made a call to a real estate attorney. I asked about asset division. About what happens to a house when only one spouse is on the deed, but both contribute. About how to prove you helped pay for something that wasn't technically yours. I also called a friend from the hospital who knew a good forensic accountant. And then, for the first time in years, I took a long, hot bath without anyone talking down to me. When I came back the next day, Nick was confused. Margaret looked smug. "Oh, did you need a little break?" she asked. I smiled. "Just tying up some things." She didn't ask what things. She just went back to pretending the living room was a furniture showroom. She had no idea that I was done trying to fit in. I wasn't going to win her over. I was going to remove her. And if Nick got in the way, he was going down too. The following week after they left, I got to work. Every night, after Nick went to bed, I stayed up with spreadsheets. I pulled up every bank statement, every Venmo transaction, every Amazon order, and every utility bill for the past 3 years. I printed them all. Highlighted everything I had paid for. Nick bought the house before we got married, but I'd paid half the mortgage every month. Not officially, not on paper. But I'd Venmo'd him my half like clockwork. I paid the electric, the water, the groceries, the damn pest control contract. I made copies of every check and every text from Nick saying, "Got your half, thanks." I built a timeline. Meanwhile, I started smiling more at home. I packed Nick's lunches again. I even left little notes in his bag like, "Love you," or "Can't wait for date night." He had no idea I was cataloging everything. Then I started talking. Casually. Light things. Like, "Isn't it weird how your mom still calls at your house?" Or, do you think she'd ever be okay with me? Nick always gave the same response. It's just how she is. I don't think she means anything by it. But one night he slipped. He was a few beers in, sitting on the porch with me. I brought up the lemon cake. I joked, maybe next time I'll just buy one from the store. She probably wouldn't notice. Nick laughed and said, she'd notice. She said you were trying too hard. I turned. When did she say that? He blinked. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. But it was too late. That meant he knew. He knew what she said, and he let it slide. He always let it slide. 2 days later, I found his insurance documents in the filing cabinet in the upstairs office. I wasn't even snooping at that point. I was preparing. His life insurance was in both our names. And I was listed as a secondary on the house title in case of death or divorce. Margaret's voice echoed in my head again. Temporary occupant. That was when I decided to speed things up. I invited them back. Just her and his father this time. I told Nick I wanted to start over and clear the air. He was thrilled. He said, she'll love that. Maybe we can finally move on. We planned a big dinner. I made everything from scratch. Roast, cornbread, a chocolate pie with homemade whipped cream. I even set out cloth napkins. I lit candles. Margaret came in like a queen entering a church. She walked through the house like she was checking for smudges. At dinner, I brought up family history. I asked her about old stories, her wedding, what it was like when Nick was a kid. I let her talk for an hour. Then I said, I was thinking it might be nice to put you in the guest book again. Since the last page was, well, weird. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I pulled a plastic bag out of my purse and slid it across the table. She looked at it, blinked. Nick leaned over to read it. Wait, when did you write this? Her face turned a shade lighter. You wrote that on your first night here, I said softly. While I was cleaning up after dinner. You went into the guest room and wrote that. And I left it in there for days because I wanted to believe maybe I'd read it wrong. Nick turned to her. Did you really write this? Margaret laughed, but her voice cracked. It was just a joke. A joke, I said. You called me a temporary occupant. In his house. His father stared at his plate. Silent. Nick stood. Jesus, mon. She looked at him, and for the first time, she looked nervous. It wasn't meant to be hurtful. I pulled out the second envelope. These are copies of every bill I've paid. Every payment I've made on this house. You think I'm temporary? I've invested more into this house than you have in your relationship with me. I let that sit. Then I said, and you're right. I'm not permanent. Nick's head snapped to me. What? I smiled. I've been speaking to a lawyer. You can keep the house. I've already got an apartment lined up. Margaret's face lit up. You're leaving? I am, I said. But not before I take what's mine. See, I may not be on the original deed, but in court, financial contribution means equity. And I've got receipts. I also have a few other things your son forgot to mention. I turned to Nick. Like the text you sent her saying it doesn't feel like your house. Or the one where you said, let's just get through it. He was pale now. You used me to keep the peace with your mother. You let her humiliate me, so you wouldn't have to grow a spine. I stood. Oh, and Margaret? I leaned closer. I've already filed a small claims motion. The guest book entry is part of the evidence. It proves intent to intimidate and insult a spouse within their shared home. It's not a lot of money. But I'll win. Her eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Try me. Margaret didn't say a word after that. She just sat there, frozen, like someone had pulled the batteries out of her. Nick followed me into the kitchen. You're seriously leaving? I am, I said. But not because of your mother. Because of you. He blinked. Me? What did I do? I laughed, sharp, bitter. You let this happen. You stood there for 3 years while she chipped away at me. You watched me turn myself inside out to be accepted. You stayed quiet. You let her call me temporary in my own home, and you said nothing. You made me feel small to keep the peace. I didn't know it was that bad. I stared at him. You did know. You just didn't care. He looked away. I moved out 3 days later. I didn't make a scene. I didn't smash things or scream. I let my lawyer do the talking. She filed the paperwork, backed by a mountain of financial records showing I paid into the house like it was mine. Because it was. We settled within 6 weeks. Nick bought me out. He used savings and a loan from his father. He told me it nearly cleaned him out. I didn't care. I walked away with $42,000 and a clean slate. But I wasn't done yet. Remember the guest book page? I posted it. I blacked out the names. I shared it on a few toxic in-laws forums with a short story. When your Emile calls you a temporary occupant in the home you built together, remember, she's only as permanent as you allow. It went viral. People flooded the comments. They called it narcissistic. Entitled, cruel. Women shared similar stories. Some even messaged me privately with their own horror tales. But one message stood out. It was from Margaret's church friend. She said, "I just want you to know you're not alone." Margaret said things like that about others too. She hides behind money and pride. Maybe now she'll learn. A week later, Nick texted me. "Mom asked me to tell you to take the post down. It's ruining her name." I replied, "Tell her thanks for the inspiration." That was the last time I spoke to him. Do I regret it? Sometimes. I miss the idea of who Nick was. The man I thought he'd be. But not the man who stood there while I got torn apart. And I can admit my fault in all this too. I let it go on too long. I should have stood up for myself earlier. I thought if I was kind enough, patient enough, they'd see me. I was wrong. Being kind to cruel people doesn't make you noble. It just makes you a target. Now, I live in a small apartment with a tiny balcony, and every evening I sit out there with a glass of wine. Legs up, music playing, wind in my face. Peace is louder than applause. And Margaret? She may still think she won. But every time someone shares that screenshot of her words, every time her name gets whispered in hushed circles or she loses another friend at church, she remembers. And that's enough.